At my father's funeral, my brother stood up and said, loud enough for the entire church to hear, "She's just here for the money. Don't worry." Dad made sure she's cut off. A few people chuckled. Others just stared. No one said a word to stop him. I was standing there in black heels I hadn't worn in years, holding a cold cup of church coffee, feeling the weight of 100 eyes press into my skin. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm the daughter they forgot. Or at least, that's what they wanted the world to believe. What no one knew, not my brother Brandon, not my aunt who refused to hug me, not even the business partners smirking behind the floral arrangements, was that my father had left behind something. A message, one that would play the very next morning. On a screen, in a locked boardroom, in front of every person who thought they had already won. The only clue? A black USB drive, tucked inside the family lawyer's breast pocket. He didn't say a word during the service. He just watched and waited. If you've ever been humiliated by the very people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever walked into a room and realized your name meant nothing to them anymore, then you know how I felt that day. But trust me, this story doesn't end in silence. If you've ever been the outsider in your own family, hit that subscribe button. Tell me where you're watching from, and let me take you back to the fishing trips that built our bond, to the lies that destroyed it, and to the final truth that flipped everything they thought they knew. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is the one they never see coming. The church hall looked the same as I remembered from childhood Easter services: polished wood pews, white roses on every windowsill, and stained glass saints watching like silent witnesses. But this time, every glance burned. No one came to speak to me. Not my cousins who used to sleep over at our house. Not Aunt Rosemary, who once taught me how to braid my hair. They all walked past like I was a stranger. Brandon, on the other hand, was magnetic. Even my mother barely met my eyes. She adjusted the sleeve of her dress like it was more important than my presence. He stood near the altar, shaking hands, patting shoulders, offering practice smiles. He looked like the grieving son America would love, tall, clean-cut, just enough moisture in his eyes to seem noble. And every time someone asked where I'd been, he answered before I could. She left for Seattle years ago. She didn't come back when Dad got sick. She was always different. Different. That word carried more weight than any insult. It meant I didn't belong. That I had chosen the wrong path. That I had failed to earn the love that was supposed to be unconditional. Megan stayed close by my side, but even she couldn't block the looks. I made my way to the refreshment table, poured myself a cup of coffee I wouldn't drink, stirred in cream just to have something to do with my hands. "Lauren," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Aunt Rosemary holding a napkin and a half-eaten cookie. "You look tired, dear," she said, not unkindly. "Grief affects us all differently, I suppose. Still, nice of you to come." I smiled the way women are taught to smile when they're being dismissed politely. "Thanks," I said. "It means a lot." She nodded and walked away before I could say another word. Across the room, I caught Brandon looking at me. He didn't glare. He smirked, like he'd already won. Like he knew something I didn't. But that's what he always thought, that he was the one in control. What he didn't know was that I'd seen Dad once a few months before his death. He'd come to one of my gallery shows in New York. He didn't tell me he was coming. Didn't even stay long. But I saw him standing in front of my painting of the Austin skyline, the one I painted from memory when I was missing home more than usual. He just stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, before finally saying, "You see the city the way I used to when I still believed in it." And then he left. No big speech, no tears, no apologies. Just a glimpse of the father I used to know. The one who woke me up at 5 a.m. for fishing trips. The one who told me that patience and timing mattered more than force. He had changed since then. Hardened, guarded. But I never stopped hoping that somewhere, buried under years of disappointment and silence, he still saw me, now as I stood in the corner of his funeral like an outsider. I remembered that moment, and it reminded me why I came. Not for inheritance, not for closure, but because something inside me refused to let his story be told without me in it. A sudden hush fell over the room. Harold Gibbons had entered quietly from the side door. My father's attorney for over 30 years, steady, serious, never impressed. He stood near the back, hands folded, expression unreadable. But I noticed something small and black tucked inside his inner jacket pocket. A USB drive. The same kind Dad used for presentations. The same kind he always carried when he had something important to share. And suddenly, I knew Brandon had no idea what was coming. Before the lies, before the silence, before my name became something my family only said in whispers, there were mornings on the lake. I must have been 7 the first time my father woke me up before sunrise. He tapped gently on my bedroom door, whispering, "Rise and shine, kiddo. Fish wait for no one." We packed peanut butter sandwiches, a thermos of lukewarm coffee for him, and juice boxes for me. By 5:15 a.m., we were out on Lake Travis in his old aluminum boat, the engine humming softly, the city still asleep. It was the one place where the world fell away. He taught me how to bait a hook, how to cast quietly, how to wait. Mostly how to wait. Patience isn't just for fishing, Lauren, he'd say. In life, sometimes you win just by holding still longer than everyone else. I held on to those lessons. They were the parts of him I could keep, even when everything else changed. Brandon never liked fishing. Too quiet, too slow, no spotlight. He preferred baseball and debate club, places with scoreboards and applause. Dad loved that about him. Said he was a natural competitor. I was different. Soft-spoken, always drawing. More interested in the ripples on the water than who caught the biggest base. For a while, Dad seemed to love that, too. He'd hang my sketches on the fridge, brag to the neighbors about how his little girl saw the world sideways. But as I got older, his tone shifted. He stopped bragging, stopped hanging up my art, started saying things like, "You're smart enough for business school, Lauren. Don't waste it." By the time I was 15, the fishing trip stopped. Brandon was already shadowing Dad at the office on weekends, wearing a clip-on tie and handing out business cards he wasn't old enough to use. I was in the garage, painting murals on scrap wood. "Art's a hobby," Dad said one night at dinner. "A creative outlet. But you can't live on color and canvas." I didn't argue, but that night I stayed up past midnight, painting a watercolor of the lake where we used to go. Dark water, early light, and the outline of 2 figures in a boat. I left it on his desk. He never mentioned it. By senior year of high school, the divide was cemented. I applied to the Rhode Island School of Design behind his back. When I got in, I sat across from him in his home office, acceptance letter in hand, stomach twisted with fear and hope. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he just leaned back in his chair and said, "So that's it then? You're throwing away everything we've built." I wanted to scream. "We didn't build anything. You built a company. I built myself." But I didn't say it. I just nodded. That night, Brandon slid into Dad's chair at the dinner table. Literally. "Don't worry, Dad," he said, grinning. "I'll carry the torch." They laughed. I chewed silently, rage in every bite. Still, Dad paid for my education. Still, he showed up quietly to my first student gallery showing. He walked in halfway through, said very little, stared at my piece, a mixed media portrait of a house being swallowed by ivy, and murmured, "You've got a good eye. Structure's off, but it's got mood." It wasn't much, but it kept me going. After I moved to New York, the calls became fewer. Mostly holidays. Short, formal. Sometimes I'd send him prints of my newest pieces. I never knew if he saw them. I never heard back. Brandon, meanwhile, became the golden boy. Promoted to VP of Development before 30. Gave keynote speeches. Won local business awards. Wrote LinkedIn posts about legacy and grit and loyalty. He curated an image so perfectly tailored, even I started to believe it. But underneath all that gloss, I began to feel something colder. Not just neglect. Erasure. Birthday cards I sent stopped being acknowledged. Voicemails disappeared into silence. Invitations to exhibitions went unanswered. Still, I kept trying. Because somewhere deep down, I believed my father could still see me, if only I reached out far enough. Until the last call. The one where I told him I'd been featured in Art and Form, a major New York magazine, where I shared, with shaky pride, that my show had sold out opening night. He listened, and then said, "That's nice. Brandon just closed the Capitol Tower deal. He's been working nonstop. Really stepped up." That was the moment I stopped trying. I thought he'd chosen, that he'd made peace with forgetting me. But I didn't know what had really happened. Not yet. The next morning, I stood outside the Mitchell Design Group boardroom at 9:57 a.m., staring at the frosted glass door like it might bite me. Behind it, I could already hear voices, Brandon's voice loudest, laughing, schmoozing with the board members like this was just another Monday. Megan had offered to come with me. I told her no. This was something I had to face alone. At exactly 10, the door opened. Harold stood there, calm and precise, holding a worn leather briefcase. "Lauren," he said with a nod. "Come in." The room went quiet as I stepped inside. 12 people sat at the long mahogany table, board members, senior managers, a few longtime legal and financial advisors. Brandon was seated at the head. Of course. He didn't even try to hide a smirk. "You made it," he said smoothly. "Good. I didn't want you to miss what Dad had to say." He leaned back in the chair like a prince waiting to be crowned. I took the only available seat, at the opposite end of the table, far from him, but directly across from Harold. Harold cleared his throat and opened his case. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, Mr. Mitchell left very specific instructions regarding the handling of his estate and this meeting." He pulled out a manila folder and placed it neatly on the table. "Before we proceed with the written will, Mr. Mitchell requested that this video be played in full, with all primary stakeholders present." He nodded to his assistant, who was already setting up a laptop and portable projector. "A video?" Brandon asked, frowning for the first time. "Since when does Dad do videos?" Harold didn't answer. He just hit play. The projector flickered, and then there he was. My father, sitting at his old oak desk at home, wearing his navy blazer and that maroon tie he only wore to weddings and funerals. He looked healthier than I remembered. Focused, calm. But there was something else in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. Regret. "Hello," he began, his voice steady. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if Harold is doing his job, you're all in the same room right now." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the boardroom. "I've spent my life building this company," he continued. "And for a long time, I believed I knew exactly how my legacy should continue." He paused, looked down for a second. When he looked back up, his face had changed. But recently, I discovered I was wrong. The room went still. "I want to speak to my daughter first. Lauren, if you're here, and I hope to God you are, I need to say something I never said out loud." He took a breath. "I'm sorry." Gasps. Audible. Around the room. "I'm sorry I stopped seeing you. I'm sorry I let silence grow between us. I'm sorry I believed what others told me instead of asking you directly." My heart felt like it stopped and sped up all at once. 6 months ago, he continued, I found a box. A shoebox in Brandon's office at home. Inside were birthday cards, invitations, letters, all from you. Heads turned toward Brandon. He went pale. "I thought you'd abandoned me, that you didn't care. But it wasn't true. Brandon had kept those from me. Intentionally. Harold pressed pause. Mr. Mitchell instructed that the video be played without interruption, he said quietly. But I think we can all take a moment to process that. Brandon shot to his feet. This is insane. He snapped. He was sick. Confused. You can't take anything he said seriously in his final months. Sit down, one of the board members said flatly. Brandon stared at him, stunned. But he sat. Harold pressed play again. I confirmed what I found. I hired someone to check. And yes, messages were deleted. Calls intercepted. Mail diverted. He leaned closer to the camera now. And that's not all. Lauren, I've been following your career. Quietly. Through galleries, reviews, anonymous purchases. I saw the woman you became. And I was proud. So damn proud. I could feel tears rising but refused to let them fall. I should have told you. But I let my own pride stop me. That ends now. He sat up straighter. As for the company, I cannot, in good conscience, leave it in the hands of someone who betrayed not only me, but the values I built this company on. Brandon's head whipped around. What is he talking about? He demanded. This is slander. The video didn't stop. There is evidence. Financial discrepancies. Bribes. Inspections falsified. The room exploded in murmurs. Which brings me to my final decision. To my son Brandon, I leave a trust of $200,000, contingent on the completion of a business ethics program and full cooperation with the pending investigation. To my daughter Lauren, I leave my personal home, my private investment accounts, and 60% controlling interest in Mitchell Design Group. Dead silence. Then my father looked into the camera one last time. Lauren, you were always the one who saw what others missed. I hope now you'll see what I never said when I should have. You were never invisible. I just wasn't looking. For a moment. No one in the room moved. The projector screen faded to black. My father's final words still hung in the air, heavier than the oak table between us. Across from me, Brandon sat frozen, jaw clenched, hands balled into fists on the polished surface. He broke first. This is a joke, he said, voice tight. This entire thing is a setup. You all heard it. He was manipulated. He wasn't in his right mind. No one responded. 60%? He barked, turning toward Harold. You're telling me he gave her controlling interest? She hasn't been in this office in a decade. I'm telling you, Harold said calmly, that your father made these decisions with full mental capacity and documented them thoroughly. The paperwork is in this folder. He tapped the leather binder in front of him. Brandon shoved back from the table. She's an artist, he snapped. What the hell does she know about real estate development? His eyes burned into mine. You're not qualified to run this company. For the first time, I spoke. I never said I was. That caught him off guard. But I know what this company used to stand for. I continued. And I know Dad didn't just hand me the keys, he handed me a responsibility. Murmurs stirred at the far end of the table. One board member, a woman named Cora, leaned forward. I'd like to review the investigation materials, she said, addressing Harold. You will, he replied. Mr. Mitchell requested full transparency. The full file will be distributed after this meeting, including financial reports, legal findings, and statements from third parties. Brandon stood again. This isn't over, he growled. I have lawyers too. You're welcome to pursue legal options, Harold said coolly. But your father anticipated that as well. He instructed me to inform you that contesting the will result in full release of the findings to the media. Brandon blanched. The threat wasn't subtle. Mitchell Design Group was a respected name, built on integrity. Public scandal would burn more than just bridges. It would collapse the brand. He didn't say another word, just stormed out, slamming the glass door behind him so hard the conference room trembled. No one followed. Silence settled again, and then, slowly, people began to rise. One by one, Board members walked past me. Some nodded politely. Others offered brief, cautious smiles. No congratulations. No applause. Just quiet acknowledgement that everything had changed. When the room was nearly empty, Harold sat beside me. He didn't speak for a long moment. Just watched me. "You okay?" he asked finally. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. I stopped. "Well, I didn't expect any of that." He gave a small smile. "Your father could be a difficult man, but when he made up his mind, he followed through." I looked down at the table. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of it all. Legacy, control, expectation. "I don't even know where to begin," I said softly. "You don't have to know today," Harold replied. "But you should come in tomorrow. Meet the executive team. Let them see you're here." I nodded slowly. After everything, I wasn't sure what I expected to feel. Relief? Victory? But what I felt was something else. Grief, yes, but also the strange, disorienting sense of being pulled into a role I never asked for. I didn't know the lingo. I didn't wear the tailored suits. I didn't speak the language of boardrooms and acquisitions. But I knew what mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. My first day back at Mitchell Design Group didn't feel like a homecoming. It felt like a test I hadn't studied for. I arrived at 8:59 a.m. in a navy blazer I borrowed from Megan and a pair of black flats that didn't quite match. When I walked through the glass front doors, every pair of eyes in the lobby turned toward me. I caught fragments of whispers. "She's the artist, right? Didn't she live in New York? Can't believe she's actually here." Some recognized me from the funeral, others from old family photos. But most just stared, like I was a rumor that had suddenly come to life. The receptionist, a woman named Claire, blinked at me before offering a polite smile. "MS. Mitchell, they're expecting you upstairs." The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent. No music, just the quiet hum of wires pulling me higher into territory I didn't understand. When the doors opened, Harold was already waiting. He gave me a small nod, then gestured toward a glass-walled conference room. Inside sat 5 people, the remaining executive team. No one smiled. I took my seat at the far end of the table, clutching the leather-bound notebook Megan had given me the night before. Across from me sat Peter Lang, the interim CEO Brandon had installed 2 years ago. He wore a silver tie and a guarded expression. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, "we appreciate you joining us. I understand this transition is unusual." I returned the nod. "I'm not here to pretend I'm a real estate expert," I said honestly. "But I am here to honor my father's values and the people who built this company with him." A few eyebrows lifted. Good. Let them be surprised. I've spent the last 2 nights reviewing project briefs, press clippings, and internal notes from my father's office, I continued. One project keeps standing out, the Jefferson Park redevelopment. Peter shifted. That's a major residential overhaul, 3 towers, 200 units. Scheduled for groundbreaking next month. I met his gaze. I'd like to pause it. Silence. Then, pause it. Cora, the CFO, repeated. Why? Because according to internal reports, the building plans were rushed. 2 of the inspection approvals were unusually fast-tracked. And the same subcontractor who botched the Oak Ridge job last year has been hired again. A heavy pause followed. I don't want to be the person who ignores a red flag because the money looks good, I said quietly. That's not who my father was. And that's not who I intend to be. Peter stared at me for a moment longer, then leaned back in his chair. To my surprise, he didn't argue. Understood, he said. We'll issue a temporary delay and do a third-party audit. Cora nodded, scribbling something in her planner. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. No applause, no warm welcomes, but no resistance either. I took that as a win. Later that afternoon, I stepped into my father's office for the first time in over 5 years. It smelled like cedarwood and old paper. The walls were still lined with blueprints and framed press articles. The desk, his desk, was immaculate, as if he'd stepped out for a meeting and might return at any moment. I walked slowly to the bookshelves behind his chair. And there it was. A small wooden box I recognized instantly. Dad's tackle box. The same one we used on every fishing trip when I was little. I opened it. Inside weren't lures or hooks. Instead, it held small, carefully labeled envelopes. Photos of my art. Clippings from exhibitions. Printouts of online articles. Even handwritten notes with titles like Lauren, Boston Skyline, 2018, Bold Palette Shift. I sank into his chair and stared at the contents. This was his way of keeping me close, of seeing me even when he couldn't say it out loud. A quiet gasp escaped my lips. At the bottom of the box, folded carefully, was a note in his handwriting. Don't let them turn you into someone else. You already know who you are. In that moment, I realized, even in silence, my father had never truly stopped watching. He just needed time to remember who I was. That was when the tears finally came. Not the kind born of grief alone, but of something heavier and more sacred. Responsibility. 3 weeks after I took the reins at Mitchell Design Group, the whispers began to fade. Not disappear, just soften. People still looked when I entered a room, but their expressions changed. Less suspicion, more curiosity. The Jefferson Park audit came back with several structural concerns. We canceled the subcontractor and brought in a new team with better ethics and higher costs. It was the first real decision I made, and it cost us, but it earned respect. You did the right thing, Peter told me in a meeting a few days later. I didn't expect that from you. He meant it as a compliment. And it was. But it also reminded me how low the bar had been set. Still, I kept showing up. I listened more than I spoke. Took notes. Asked questions. Owned my ignorance. But I also brought ideas. New ideas. Instead of more glass towers, I proposed mixed-use community spaces with accessible art installations. Instead of PR campaigns about urban dominance, I pitched stories about architectural storytelling and emotional connection to place. Some resisted. Some rolled their eyes. But one by one, people began to listen. 6 weeks in, I proposed a partnership with the Austin School for the Arts, a program that would feature student-designed murals in low-income housing developments we were building. Why? One board member asked. What does that have to do with real estate? Everything, I replied. We don't just build structures. We shape how people feel inside them. And suddenly, the room went quiet in the right way. That night, I stayed late at the office, flipping through the last few pages of my father's project journals. Near the back, in his handwriting, was this line. Legacy isn't what you build. It's what outlives you. The next morning, I announced the creation of the Raymond Mitchell Foundation for Urban Art and Integrity. Funded by a percentage of Mitchell Design Group's annual profits, its mission would be to support public art in underserved neighborhoods, ethical architecture, and young creatives. Brandon's name was nowhere on the press release. He hadn't returned since the reading of the will. Last I heard, he was in Costa Rica, figuring things out. I didn't wish him failure, but I also didn't wait for his return. Some people grow best when left alone with the consequences of their choices. Instead, I focused forward. 6 months after the funeral, I hosted the first gallery event in the new lobby space at headquarters, a rotating art exhibition curated by local students. The theme? Foundations. As I stood by the entrance that night, watching strangers admire canvases filled with color, texture, and meaning, I felt something shift. A little girl pointed at one mural and whispered, "I want to paint like that one day." Her mom smiled and nodded, and in that moment, I saw myself not as an outsider, but as the bridge that made her dream possible. Not validation, not triumph, alignment. This was who I was. Not just the daughter of Raymond Mitchell. Not just the surprise heir or the corporate anomaly. But a bridge between old and new. Between business and expression. Between what my father built and what I would carry forward. After most guests had left, I walked down to the small courtyard behind the building. It was quiet there, lit only by a single spotlight aimed at the bronze plaque mounted beside a garden bed. In memory of Raymond Mitchell, builder, visionary, father. I sat on the bench in front of it, pulling my coat tighter around me as a warm spring breeze swept through the trees. "I hope you see this," I whispered. "All of it." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a print of the painting I had made after our last fishing trip. I tucked it under the plaque, not as a tribute, not as closure, but as continuation. Because legacy isn't about who comes first. It's about who chooses to stay when no one expects them to. And I was here, still building, still believing. Sometimes, the legacy you inherit isn't the one you wanted. It's the one that needs you most. You don't have to carry your parents' legacy, but you can choose which pieces to keep. And sometimes, those pieces become the foundation of something entirely new to us. But when life hands you a story halfway told, you can pick up the pen and write something new.